You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we are here in our first week, Herds, of doing our taxes for the year, discussing Agatha Christie's The ABC Murders.
Yeah, we're going to be tackling, and by we I mean me, I'm solving it this week, tackling a Hercule Poirot classic story. Though a story that I believe is a little bit towards the end of his run, but it's an ambitious mystery, and the book itself kind of calls that out to how this is the biggest case that Poirot's ever been on.
It's very clear that with all the mentions of retirement and also Poirot, foreshadowing his own death in chapter 3.
Well, I was curious about that because I hadn't really read much about this book, and I haven't read Curtain is the final novel.
Yes. Which I think was published posthumously.
There's some talk about how Poirot is going to, jokingly of course, he's going to solve his own death one day.
Yes, they even say it should be put into a book.
Yeah, by Hastings, presumably. Yeah, it's very silly, but also I'm really enjoying that kind of, we're far enough into the Poirot narrative that we can poke fun at his tropes.
There's even a point at which Hastings says, if I had to pick one thing that I remembered from the ABC Murders case, it would be conferences.
Yes, there are lots of conferences.
But before we get too far into this, I did want to talk about why we're covering this novel today.
Yeah, sure.
Which is that it was one of a few novels of the Golden Age that was, when serialized, published as a competition for readers to enter.
Oh, interesting.
I'll link on the podcast the She Done It episode about this particular trend. But in 1935, when this was being serialized, it was novelized in 1936, readers were invited to send in their solutions. One person got exactly everything right.
Oh my goodness.
And apparently that person, according to Carolyn, was the outlier, but given we'd just been talking about who shot Mr. Burns and the competition they ran for that, I thought this was a fun way to file our taxes for the year.
It's nice seeing a murder mystery competition that goes right. We're not arbitrarily picking contestants from the first 1,000 entries and ignoring people who actually got it right, that sort of thing.
But yeah, the ABC Murders is a really interesting one because unlike your usual Poirot novel where we are set up with a very distinct functioning murder and a collection of suspects. Yeah. In the ABC Murders, we sort of have to collect suspects as we go because the murders are framed as a serial killing from this character who signs letters to Poirot as ABC.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. My character list is very strange because not only is there just a lot of characters, but also I've got 6 characters as being important or related to the mystery for the first murder. I've got 4 for the second murder and only 1 for the third murder. I have the name of the victim. I guess we haven't really seen the crime scene yet, but I don't know what the case may be here. Maybe it's my attention span dwindling as I get further into the book. But I suspect it's that, there's a varying number of characters that we need to pay attention to from one murder to the next.
Yeah, because it seems like the core question that Christie is sort of wrangling with in this story comes back to that discussion between Poirot and Hastings where they're talking about their ideal crime. Through that conversation, you can sort of see that the core tension in the mystery of this book is that we have a serial killer committing all of these crimes, but Poirot is in that scene sort of saying, no, there still must be a human element to this. So your challenge as a reader is pretty explicitly to figure out how it isn't a serial killer and where the humanity seeps through the cracks.
Yeah, look, we're only a third of the way through. I can't say I've cracked everything yet, but there has to be a story. There's lots of details about this character lost a family member during the war, and this character there's lots of emphasis put on the fact that there are characters who are foreigners as well, because this is not just a serial killing, quote unquote. It's also a challenge directed at Poirot because he's getting these letters before each of the murders.
Yeah.
So it's got to have something to do with him. Right?
Yes.
If he's being directly challenged, there must be a connection to him.
Yeah, well, the other thing that's fun about it is all of those conferences mean that we do get a lot of characterization, but the sort of question is how does the characterization of these broader suspects matter to the core case?
Because there's lots of, I will say, there's lots of mirroring going on, which I think is interesting. There's lots of comments about how characters don't look like how they used to a long time ago, which is obviously setting up maybe this character isn't who they say they are, or maybe this character could stand in for another character, that sort of thing. There's 2 sisters that I think have something similar going on. And then the way that Megan Bernard, the sister of the victim, the second victim, is kind of opposite to Donald Fraser, who is an abusive boyfriend, who again is a parallel to Mr. Asher. Yeah. There's all these little parallels and mirrors that Christie has set up, and they're clearly, it's for me to recognize as the reader the patterns in the book and try to orchestrate something.
Yeah, and there's also this big line that's clearly, because we don't have a core suspect or set of suspects in the case, we're very much dealing with the peripheral characters in the victims' lives, it seems, of what would actually drive someone to kill them. So, for example, Franz Asher and the abusive boyfriend, Franz has threatened to kill his wife many times, but it's sort of played off in a weird way as like, oh, that's just his German humor.
It's so interesting, their relationship, because and we only really have the word of Mr. Asher, who is out partying all night with his men friends.
All of whom the cops say will, no
they're
point
all
getting them to
ne'er-do-wells.
testify, right?
None of their words can be verified. But he says, oh, that was just a game. And when asked about why does she keep giving you money? He's like, oh, she's my wife, I guess. That's just a thing. I can read into that as much as I like as well, which is fun. Why would she be giving him all of that money? Is there blackmail? What's going on?
I guess the question I have for you when we're talking about these mirrors and parallels is that the other side of the case is, of course, the police. And we have a big cast of police kind of fronted by Inspector Japp, who's an old friend of Poirot's at Scotland
He's
Yard.
not even in my list. There's a lot. There's a lot of cops.
And I think that interestingly, they lack a lot of parallels, and also there's not a lot of momentum that's sort of being built up behind any narrative thing they're doing, other than the fact that Inspector Crome doesn't like Poirot. That's kind of our main police device.
Crome he's a really fun character because he really is, he's filling in the role of incompetent cop, but he is established to have solved crimes before. He apparently caught some child killers, and he has this whole spiel where he talks about how he caught this guy by using these modern techniques, and they basically they confess to you right there in the moment with these very fancy things that he's doing. And Poirot just kind of says, yeah, I've seen that before. And the Inspector Crome says, oh, really? Annoyed. Yeah. He's just annoyed that Poirot is that's not new, mate.
I feel like it's almost an acknowledgement of something we were talking about with Moriarty last year by Anthony Horowitz, where Poirot and Hastings keep talking about the things that are written in detective novels, whereas the police keep talking about the things that happen in actual crimes. Mm-hmm. And it's like Fantasyland and the real world crossing over is the main conflict between them.
Yeah, it's really interesting, those conference sequences as well, because they're trying to decide how to deal with the consequences of the killings. Mm-hmm. That place where the fantasy rubs up with reality, because I, as the reader, am thinking, I'm really excited to get another letter and another kill, because then I get more clues. But every single time somebody says, well, we'll just have to wait for the next murder, somebody says, that's really unethical.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the thing, right, is that Poirot and Hastings, when they read the first letter, they say, oh, better watch the news for a robbery. And Poirot goes, I certainly bloody hope so.
Yeah, I hope it's not anything worse than that. That would be crazy.
Although I did find Hastings' response quite funny, where he's like, worse? What do you mean? It's like, Hastings, how many of these bloody novels have you been in, mate?
Yeah, how many of them have you written? I really enjoy the leaning on the fourth wall that we're getting here. I'm a sucker for meta fiction. We've established that. Watching them try to decide whether it is ethical to wait for another murder, watching Poirot throw up his hands and say, what am I? The magician? The sorcerer? I cannot produce a solution from hardly any clues. Yeah. And I think most interestingly, from a practical standpoint, deciding whether or not to make the investigation public is also really interesting, because their hand gets forced in the end, because once people pick up on, oh, there's been these 3 kills that all happening around the same time, and they seem to be killed in the same way or whatever.
There's even a note, Betty, the second victim, was picked because she was pretty enough that it would make the news.
Yes, it is something that has been mentioned about both of the female kills we've had so far. It is interesting, I guess. I do wonder, because there's a lot of context around the characters given to us and their relationships, but you do have to wonder how much of it is going to factor in at that point.
Because, of course, the other clue, which is the last thing I'll kind of close off, and a huge part of this novel before we get into the mystery section, is that the victims, all of them have alliterative names.
Yes.
It was Alice Asher, Betty Barnard, and Carmichael Clark. The trouble that they run into is, for example, they go to try and stop Betty being murdered, but because they're searching the town that the letters that they receive for people named BB, they miss Elizabeth Barnard because Betty is her nickname.
And the kills also become more difficult to intercept because the first kill happens at like 5:30 in the evening or 6 or something. And then the next kill is between midnight and 1 a.m.
And then the third one, Poirot gets the letter too late.
Yeah, he's like, oh, wait, it's the 30th, and we've received the letter today, and that's when the killing is going to happen, and oh dear, there's been some sort of mix-up. Like, clearly this wasn't part of the killer's plan, which is really interesting.
We will come back to those little mysteries, though, at the end of the show today. You're listening to Death of the Reader. We're discussing the ABC murders by Dame Agatha Christie.
Woo.
This is 2SER 107.3. Stick around.
Dame.
You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour. Now, with such a thriving scene of local Australian authors, there's little chance we could resist having our next guest, Dinuka Mackenzie, on. She's the author of the Kate Miles Murder Mystery series, starting with The Torrent, which was one of our honorable recommendations in 2022, and she has just released the third book in that series, Tipping Point. Dinuka, welcome to Death of the Reader.
Hello, it's lovely to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Dinuka, murder mystery is all about the little details, and as a finely tuned clue hunting mind, some details in your book stuck out more than others. In particular, the brand trademarked nods to Cornetto, Bluey, and Lego during Kate's scenes with her family. They've needled their way into my brain, and I need to know how you thought you could get away with this almost product placement.
That's hilarious. I did not think it was product placement, but I think, it's always good. What I love about culture-specific details that kind of sets the book in a particular time, place, and a particular, place in terms of country and culture. And I think they're good. They're little kind of Easter eggs for the people who know, they know. I mean, if anyone wants to pay me for that very subtle, product placement, I would not be saying no to that. But no, that was not, that wasn't, I don't have any, agreements with any companies to subtly add little plugs for their products in my book.
I'm excited to hear this interview played in a court case in the future. I feel like I feel like the sequences with Kate's family kind of stick out because they are sort of sparse moments of joy in her life as presented in the book. How have you sort of pushed into these spaces narratively with the ongoing police investigation that Kate becomes personally embroiled in once again?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's always been what the audience has really loved about the series right from the start, is the fact that there is that focus on her family, and it is very much a book that her family side of, her life is very much goes hand in hand with her investigation side of, her work. So that both those sides are explored in, all three of the books. I would say sort of this one, in Tipping Point, is probably the book that has maybe the least amount of those scenes. I mean, I think the first two books very much focused on the, the pregnancy and new motherhood and that kind of thing. This still has that central tension, which is always for Kate, the thing that she really loves, which is her job, and the thing that she's really good at is what puts her into conflict with the needs of her family. And that tension runs through all three books. But in this book, it kind of, I broadened that to be sort of her broader family. And what I mean by that is, not her kids and her husband, but her, her sibling, who is very much at the centre of this novel. The loyalty between police force and family is very much put to the test in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I am very interested in that relationship with Luke, the estranged brother who's come back into the story. I guess The thing that I was most interested in with their relationship is obviously he becomes part of the murder investigation, and so there are all of these scenes where like in theory, in a perfect world, it should be Luke's come home and we've got a new dad now and we're like a big happy family, but because of the suspicion and Luke's like bad actions, which we'll get into, they can't quite keep that piece going for very long. I think that's why those trademarked moments kind of settle with me, is because they are so sparse, I guess. Maybe that's a side effect of you trying to sort of broaden the novel, as you say.
Yeah. And I think those moments are important because I think, like Kate's family is, that's a very integral part of her. And, she absolutely adores her two kids and, they're a very important part of her family. And I also wanted to show realistically what that would mean for her small family. And like in this book, for example, you have her young son, who is about to go to school next year. He is suffering from anxiety because he can feel that the family has gone through quite a few things and he is unsettled in his own life. The impact of that, if she has to manage now an anxious child, what that means for him starting school, and things like that. So which are very kind of, I think, very relatable things for other parents. They can process that stress in different ways, and that can come out as kind of playing up or kind of being really rigid with their routine and things like that. So I think they're very relatable things. And I just wanted to show that, like just as much as Kate is struggling with, the aftermath of various things that have happened, so is her family.
Yeah, because I think one of the really interesting things, particularly about Luke's role in that, is that with a kid going to school while Luke's life is kind of spiraling out of control, not even entirely outside of his own design, you sort of have this like sympathetic dirtbag character who's part of the family that Kate is also at some level worried about the influence that has. I guess what was it like writing Luke so on the page this time when he's largely been, a background hurdle for Kate in the previous books?
Yeah, it's true because he was very much only really referred to in the last books, and I think maybe in the Torrent, I think they have a phone conversation, but that's really about it. To kind of signal to the reader, hey, this book is not specifically going to be about Kate's kind of struggles as a mother. It's going to be broadening. And a way of signaling that to the reader was, getting Luke right up front. I think he's the first chapter after the very brief kind of prologue. So, so you're immediately going into a Kate novel kind of knowing that it's going to be a slightly different take. And what I was really interested in doing there is exploring that sibling relationship because, for the first time, Kate is on the other side of a crime where, a person that she loves and that she, thinks she knows is getting accused of something. That was an interesting position for me to put Kate in, and I wanted to explore that with her. And that allowed me to look at sort of the idea around, well, what do you do when a person you love is accused of something? Because that love doesn't kind of disappear. You suddenly have to take this new piece of information and incorporate it with, what you thought you knew about that person and try and recalibrate like what you knew and having to deal with that. So I wanted to see how that played out for the family.
Well, it does make me wonder, after 3 novels of getting your family's name thrown about in the media, how much more Kate and her family can take before the point tips over, so to speak. Benjamin Stevenson once brought to my attention that writing a sequel is admitting that you've been reduced to imitating yourself. Do you have one tip to keep things fresh in the writing room? Dinuka, go.
The thing with sequels is you got to keep within the rules of the universe that you've created, but you've got to find something fresh within that universe. So you can't say the exact same thing. And that's why, like, for example, with Tipping Point, I really wanted to kind of stretch Kate away from, the major themes of motherhood, which I felt like I have sufficiently looked at in the previous 2 books. In reality, I think there is there is an end point for series, because I think there comes a point, and I think there's a natural end point because there comes a point where people just don't believe that many bad things will be happening to one person. And, one town. And so I think there is an actual endpoint. Whether that has come for Kate, who knows?
Just as much in your hands as it is in the publishers. Dinuka, thank you so much for joining us here on Death of the Reader. It's always a treat having you on, and a massive congrats on the release of Tipping Point.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I love chatting to you guys. So thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Dinuka McKenzie there, talking about her latest novel, Tipping Point, the third book in the Detective Kate Miles series. Thank you so much to Harper Collins for putting us in touch with Dinuka and providing copies of the book. If you missed our discussion on Death of the Reader Undead, you can also catch that up on the podcast, along with the full chat. We're going to jump back over to Agatha Christie's The ABC Murders. And Hertz has got a little problem to solve. You're listening to Death of the Reader on 2SER 107.3. You're listening to Death of the Reader, Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we're on the trains today, Herds. I've got my ABC Rail Guide, the alphabetical guide to Britain's railways, because we are, of course, talking about the ABC Murders by Agatha Christie. It's time to file our taxes for the year. The Murder Mystery tax man came around and he said, Sophie Hannah doesn't count. And we said, but Sophie's lovely. We love Sophie.
She doesn't count according to tax man. He's a harsh man that we have to make up for last year, and that's what we're doing.
If you missed it, by the way, Cameron Furlong and I, our editor-in-chief, spoke about Sophie Hannah's new screen production over on Death of the Reader Undead a couple of weeks ago, so you can catch that up on the podcast. But Herds, you have 3 murders to solve.
Oh, no. Okay. All right. So, this is terrifying. Here's the thing. I think the first thing to kind of get out of the way is that this is not a Cluey novel in the sense that we do not have locked rooms.
No.
We do not have a convenient list of suspects.
We do not.
And I think most tellingly, I'm actually going to pull this up. Hold on.
It's not even a closed circle.
No, it's not even close to a closed circle, which is a shame, even though that would be alliterative.
We're in 3 entire different towns, all of which are telegraphed to us in advance by our killer by post. Except Herds, as you were saying at the end of last section, the third kill, which arrives late because the name of Poirot's new residency is misspelled.
The suspicion from Inspector Crome is that the person writing the letter has written the name of their drink onto the envelope rather than the actual address.
Does that sound plausible to you?
No, I mean, not really.
The person who wrote 2 letters correctly to the same address messed it up the third time.
I don't know why you wouldn't just, if you were planning on doing the ABC murders, why wouldn't you just do all the envelopes at the same time? Maybe even write all the letters at the same time and schedule them. I'm just saying.
How are you supposed to schedule them?
I don't know. I think that the delay is intentional, which is going to be fun. I'm very curious to see in what manner Carmichael Clark has been killed.
I mean, do you think there's a link between our 3 victims other than the alliteration?
I do. So here's the thing. This murder, there's lots of clues being thrown around, swimming around in my brain. And something that I keep coming back to is that they're talking about the gender of the crime, which is a crazy thought. They say it's a man's crime, but it's a woman's thing to write anonymous letters, which let's not talk about sexism in Christie novels. We'll be here all week.
Yeah.
But I will propose to you that what are we doing?
Come on.
I will propose to you. So there's quite a few passages in this book that talk about children. They talk about the children playing in the streets.
Yes.
They talk about the schools being out this week.
Oh, no.
They talk about, look, it couldn't be someone that the community would recognize doing these kills because they would recognize them.
No one would blink an eye at a child going into a tobacco shop, Ben.
Look, I think it's plausible. This is a time when children could run around in the streets and play and be handed lettuce and strawberries and no one would bat an eyeball.
Specifically lettuce and strawberries?
That's what he's been given in the book. Poirot says, Hastings, why did you buy strawberries? It'll ruin your suit if it gets all the juice into your suit out of your pocket. And he says, you're right. And he gives it to a small child. That child is a cold-blooded murderer. It's the irony you see. They give him the gift of a blood-red punnet of strawberries when that child is in fact the killer. Okay. Now you may be wondering, how could a child This is a foolish thing to be wondering, but
Get
how
between
could a
three
child
different towns.
get between 3 different towns and also concoct such an amazing scheme?
I mean, I wouldn't put it past a child to concoct such
The
a
reality is Inspector Crome, who suggests, like an amateur, that the White Horse Mansion could have been confused with the White Haven drink, other way around. He's actually 3 children in a trench coat.
Oh no.
So how could a child make it between 3 towns? The answer is he got 3 different children, one in each town.
I see.
And this is going to blow your mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ABC murders. You know what children learn?
The ABCs.
The ABCs.
Yep.
Yeah. He's
Okay.
picking it up. He's picking up what I'm putting down. He knows I've got him cornered.
It's true. And I'm so excited for Christie to have Poirot say when he solves the crime that it was like taking candy from 3 babies.
Well, only Texas would commit these 3 children to jail anyway. So
I see.
they're probably going to make it away scot-free.
Scot-free, yeah.
That's why it's one of those infamous, Christie books.
Okay, but all this aside, you still haven't actually established a motive here.
So the motive is-
Hold on. The other thing I need to ask you.
Man doesn't want to let me talk. Crome solved a series of child murders, and these were the children that were murdered.
Oh, I see. They
Or
actually
would've
killed
been.
him.
Yeah, and assumed his position. That
I
makes
see.
sense to me. That works.
I just want to know how you think what Hastings and Poirot have said is their ideal crime here intertwines with what these 3 children are up to.
So here's the thing. All of those things that Hastings said as he's like, I want the pretty girl and I want the discharged gameskeepers and the poison, but not to be too technical, all rubbish.
All rubbish.
Because
You reckon
Poirot,
Christie just put it in for a distraction?
Well, no, it's not a distraction. It's a setup. Poirot's response, where it says that he would like a very simple crime, a crime with no complications, a crime of quiet domestic life, which would involve children. Very unimpassioned. He talks about these people playing cards together, and maybe one of the people playing cards gets up while everyone else is engrossed in the game and kills the guy by the fireplace. I would say that these children are just playing a game.
Yep.
That's the connection.
Okay.
Also, I would like to point out that all the people that have been killed so far have been in bad relationships, possibly producing bad households.
I see. And this is
And the children
getting back at bad families.
They're getting
Yep.
back at their bad parents
Yep.
because Poirot says in his psychological analysis that the culprit that he's looking for as a child grew up with a lack of attention and is now seeking it. So clearly, the children are playing some kind of murder game to get back at the bad parents that never gave them the attention they deserved. Why they're killing the non-abusive spouses, I will never know. But clearly it's all part of the game.
Herds, I'm starting to feel like your 4 children in a trench coat theory, or
No,
3
no,
children.
3 children. So there's 3 towns. So it's going to be 1 child per town. And they've all banded together to impersonate a child murder solver in order to murder bad parents.
I see.
That makes sense to me. Does that not make sense to you? I don't think there's any holes.
It's all right. It's all right.
It's excellent. Come on. There's foreshadowing.
Alrighty. Well, Herds, I'm proud of you for your efforts today. I'm going to go home and weep. If you had to pick a second most likely culprit after 3 people in a trench coat, who do you think it's going to be?
I still like Crome. I like the idea that he's throwing off the case by being like, oh, it must have been a simple misunderstanding.
Even though he has no mirror and that Knox would be very disappointed in you for
He would have no
suggesting...
mirror. Maybe we just haven't met his mirror yet. I am conscious of the fact that we haven't actually seen Carmichael Clark's crime scene yet. So
That's true.
I feel like you're holding something from me there, but we will find out.
What do you mean, Herds? You couldn't possibly be suggesting that in this novel where Poirot and Hastings wish for a rich man who would make the papers to be murdered, that Carmichael Clark could be important in any way, could
Are
you?
you telling me that he's the... Oh, God. You telling me he's the leaf in the forest, so to speak? I guess we'll see. I guess we'll figure that one out.
Butterfly flaps its wings. Poirot is a hurricane.
It would be fun if, like, there are 3 killings, but only one of them is, like, the intended target. Like, it's a smoke screen. I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see how we go.
I guess we will. Hurricane Hercule definitely would be a good wrestling name for Poirot. You're listening to Death of the Reader. This is your Murder Mystery World Tour. We are talking Agatha Christie's The ABC Murders, and next week on the show, Herds, you are going to be reading up to and including Chapter 27, The Doncaster Murder.
That sounds like it's really far in. It's not that far in. Doncaster. Oh, no, there is a D. Oh, here we go.
Here we go.
Woo!
Murder number 4.
Yeah. There's lots of notes. Wait.
Note not from Mr. Hastings.
Sorry, not. It's not notes from Hastings. It's not from Hastings. It's not from Hastings. Good to know. All right. I'm ready for it.
This is Death of the Reader. You're listening to 2SER 107.3. See you with the ABC Murders next week on the show. Catch you then. We're out of here.
Woo!